Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a quick little discussion here on the Crimson Tactics situation. Partially to have some critiques of some of the recent version type of stuff, partially to kind of throw some perspective on the controversy that's been going on with this thing lately. And then also lastly, just some kind of hopes for the future and what have you. So let's go ahead and get started here. I will say this is, if I sound a little bit more on the tired side, I actually went on like a 40-minute rant and then noticed I forgot to even turn it on. So yeah, definitely good to make sure that your stuff is actually on there, kids. Only got a little bit of time left. So first of all, a few things to point this out. In terms of the game itself, it does finally have controller support at this point, like full controller support for everything. Like it had controller support before, but Steam Deck was not supported. It finally does have that, though it does occasionally switch to mouse. It's good enough if you're playing on a Steam Deck, you're used to the occasional jank. It's familiar enough to folks that are familiar with the genre to be comfortable. Though I will say one thing that does kind of bug me about the way that they have the controls set up at this point. And I apologize for not having it all launched and ready to go, but there are other things I want to show you here. But as far as the controls go, there's a lot of the kind of genre in general typically has copied a lot of the stuff that, let's say, like a Tactics Ogre PSP did, like over a decade ago, simply because a lot of it was very intuitive, and one of those common things was the Y or X or square menu being your kind of HP bar menu. Just basically just a quick toggle for turning stuff on and off. It is still used for a toggle, but it's used for other things in this particular control setup. Now, the annoying thing about all of this, let me go double check the audio levels real quick. That is surprisingly low, actually. Let's go ahead and turn the music up slightly so you don't hear that buzz, because it's summer and it's merciless and there's the air conditioner and it always comes through as a buzz. Anyway, so as far as that particular thing, there you do a lot of healing and attacking, obviously. It's an SRPG. So it would be nice to still have that as a toggle for those health bars, because it does feel a little bit of like an issue when you're going and trying to look for what needs to be healed. You can't remember which of your 3 knights are there that need healing, and well, then you got to go manually find them instead of just pushing a button to know where they all are. It's been a standard feature in a lot of things for a while. Again, you'll hear me say Failseal did it quite a decent bit. I'm pretty sure it's even the same button on Symphony of the War. I always want to call it Symphony of the War because I'm always thinking March of the Black Queen, because it's always Ogre Battle meets Fire Emblem in that situation. I apologize if I randomly call it Symphony of the War. See, it's just like it just automatically happens. Anyway, so it would be good to see that particular button issue fixed. I'm still seeing a few issues with the control inputs over, specifically when you go to target an enemy. There's cases where it'll just kind of skip over the targeting thing and assume you're trying to target the field, and then you're kind of in that free roam targeting the units to go read about them kind of mode. Not sure what that's about exactly. Please bear in mind, again, I'm only a few hours in. I haven't exactly been digging down this particular one just due to control type situations. Like, I grew up with this genre, which means that I got used to button controls. Mouse and keyboard just doesn't feel right for me for these games. Yes, even XCOM. I always play XCOM on a controller. If you're thinking, wait, what about Enemy Unknown? Yeah, that's why I love the Vita version more than any of the others. Anyway. So either way, to me, there's just certain things that are expected as far as the buttons go. I didn't see that there. It's functional enough to be familiar, but it's still kind of awkward, at least for me personally, to play. So hopefully they get that sorted out. If you're going back to an existing save, I'm assuming something over the last few updates has caused something weird in terms of the balance or something, because I know my original save is practically soft-locked. Where it wound up in a situation where everything was pretty cozy the last time I played this. There have been just a ton of updates since then, so they just regularly get pincered to death by basically everything, so I'm not sure exactly what changed balance-wise, but they get absolutely steamrolled every direction they go in. I do plan to go through the whole thing start to finish to give a actual kind of a definitive answer as far as the actual overall value of the game at this point. So let's go ahead and address the controversy at this point. The controversy that ended up happening... Actually, shoot, before we get to that, sorry, a couple other criticisms that I'd like to throw out there before I forget. In terms of the UI, I really wish that they had added a thing that tells you when you've cross-classed somebody. Because cross-classing is a pretty big thing. If we can go and look at the images and whatnot, can we just go ahead and mute this real quick? Please mute it before we get in trouble. Let's just go ahead and look through their video. When it comes to cross-classing and things, you'll notice if we expand this, we'll see over here on the bottom, their whole thing right here. They say the type of unit they primarily are, and they'll say what element they are. But as far as whether or not they've been cross-classed into something else, it doesn't tell you. So, for example, if you for example had a caster that was a wizard or something, and you gave him his spellcasting skills, you threw him onto a different class, let's say a knight or something, it still would just say he is a knight. And I know personally the way that I ended up getting around this was just renaming them classic XCOM style of just stabby wizard or whatnot. So it just might be something to consider there. They did seem to address the really, really slow health bars from last time. That's been sorted out, but again, a lot of it feels a little unintuitive still. It feels like it needs a bit more kind of polish there. I'm not actually sure why they went with necessarily these bars as opposed to something that looks more like this here. And in fact, specifically lately with Tactics Ogre PSP getting that HD UI project, that idea of that really thin colorized, strong colorized bar looks very, very pretty on backgrounds like these. So I'm hoping that's something that they maybe will address at some point. A lot of folks have mentioned that these feel a little placeholders, so it would be nice to see. Sorry for the multiple mice on screen, by the way. So it would be good to see that there. Anyway, there's a lot of mechanics in this game that do feel pretty darn good. You're seeing a lot of the I don't think we'll see that here, but surrender mechanics. You've got your flanking mechanics. You've got your area hitting mechanics. Again, I'm gonna restart it just to know specifically what we're looking at as far as all that stuff goes, because it does feel like my original units from when I was first reviewing the thing just don't seem to function in this build for whatever reason. But again, this is more than likely because they were from an older build, and they do not even seem to have the skills that many of the randos have as soon as I walk into a random map. So it could be a whole number of different things. It's hard to judge at this point. It's hardly unusual for the genre in general. I think the only one that I've seen that ever directly went out of its way to make sure that you never... Well, actually, I've seen two that directly make sure that you never have to worry about levels, which was either the new XCOM games or Tactics Ogre Reborn. In general, for the most part, many of these you do typically have to worry about the levels that you're running into. But in this particular case, it just sort of felt like they were using skills that none of my people even had access to for, again, I'm assuming old-timey reasons, because I don't remember there even being a flank mechanic or a pincering mechanic back when I last played it. They did add, like I mentioned earlier, name-changing type of stuff in this build, but okay, I'm rambling again, and okay. The controversy in question, for those that missed it, they released the game yesterday. But then we'll probably immediately tell going over the comments. The scope of the game also got cut down dramatically from the original kind of stated version, but also at the same time, the price didn't change. So it's this weird, super weird to judge situation now, because on the one side you got okay, that is clearly a rookie mistake to run into financial problems that you didn't see coming. It seems like something that you would have seen coming a decent bit away. I mean, I used to be in more of that kind of corporate start from nothing, fly too close to the sun type of situation back in the day. I've seen countless investors go and fuck up in really dramatic ways. So this is hardly, the end of the world by any means. This stuff happens, but it does feel like something that maybe would have been seen a decent bit before. Basically, what ended up happening here is that, again, supposedly the story is still 40 hours long. As far as mounts and things, it says 3+. That does feel very oddly specific, almost like it's meant to say 4 or something. It's very kind of an oddly specific thing to put there. But anyway, so a lot of things throughout the whole thing were addressed with this whole release update. Again, Steam Deck got added on there, AI got reworked, autosaves got reworked, supposedly there's rebalances to all of this stuff, which again, considering that I was playing on hard mode, I'd assume some of that stuff was kind of outbalanced from where I was originally, so there's a good chance all of that stuff was just kind of in a weird state. In general, it seemed like this part was fine. The confusing part is that they ran into financial issues, and then they removed the original post stating the original intended kind of intended scope. So originally it was supposed to be 5 different playable factions, and you're basically going and playing all of them, and then I guess they all resolve somehow or something. In this particular case, they cut it down to a 40-hour story. Again, 40 plus, so we're going to say 45, whatever. So pretty standard length for these games, to be honest. I mean, like I'd say, I think I finished Fell Seal originally, like 20, 30, maybe something hours. Tactics Ogre in general, standard run is again, like typically about 30 hours. I have seen people go easily 100 plus depending on how far they want to go with it, and current speed run is 14 hours as far as that goes. So either way, as far as length goes, like I've seen a few folks get mad at me for not getting super pissed off at the whole removing the post thing, but the way I see it, it's really hard to judge the value of these things, because we're talking about again, we're going to assume 45-hour whatever game for $30, which, you know, it is what it is, based on what seems to be different routes and choices and what have you. To me, that seems like, from a value prospect, as far as products go, to me, that sounds fine. Especially when you're considering it with other stuff. But this is where it gets super weird to consider it with other stuff. So, like, you take your Fell Seals and stuff like that, and let's say, you know, in their particular case, let's say, you know, let's go pull that up real quick. So, like, we take a look over at something like Fell Seal here, and, you know, typically, again, you know, standard length was like 30, 40 hours going through the game there. They got the DLC at this point, so that ends up changing a decent bit. But, like, 1.5 playthroughs was 100 hours on my end. On Switch was, you know, another couple playthroughs. And it was one of these cases where, it wasn't exactly some crazy high-budget thing, but they typically had enough constant goodwill towards the community there that it was sort of like a mutual support type situation. Obviously, indie games in general will always kind of need that community support to kind of keep stuff running smoothly, and so it felt really nice, you know, playing through something like this and, you know, getting that feeling that it's like, oh, you know, the devs are doing everything in their power to appeal to everything that you possibly could want here. Or we go over to something like Symphony of War there, which apparently has yet another update, which, again, did a very similar thing where they were reviving this classic genre, going for, like, Fire Emblem plus Ogre Battle. And again, there was this constant feedback thing of, like, oh, you know, they feel like they're really giving it their all here. I'm actually a little bit surprised that this only says 10 hours, because I swear this was a decent bit longer than that. But again, in their particular case, I remember this also had a bit of a controversy at launch. I don't remember what it was. I think for some folks it's just that it was considered too easy, but again, there was still that feeling that, like, the community was talking to the devs were talking back, everybody was all happy and hunky-dory and what have you. But either way, not exactly the craziest budget thing in the world, but still it felt complete. And that's kind of the running theme here, that they're looking back at old things from the past, they're bringing them back, they're making them shiny and new, adding some new features, and then there's this constant feeling that everybody's talking to each other and understanding each other, you know? Or like, actually one game that I want to bring up here that you don't hear brought up too often, that I'm hoping that this one will kind of take a similar route to, possibly, which was Himeko's Story. This is one that I covered years ago. Again, another smaller kind of Ogre Battle-like situation here. Where in their particular case, this was like 1 or 2 people off on the other end of the world going and working on this thing. And man, this game's gotten a hell of a lot bigger. I think it was like 500 megabytes at first, and now it's up to 10 gigs. But anyway, like, this was again a game that typically was not necessarily the fanciest thing in the world, but there's still a lot of those feelings that stuff has been. Stuff has been kept an eye on. There weren't any direct controversies. They just kind of kept at it. And so far, it seems to all, still be chugging along here. So just one little controversy doesn't necessarily mean the end of the the end of the world here, as far as just this one random financial decision here. I'm hoping that they similarly will just kind of keep at it, keep adding new features, keep stuff going, keep expanding the project, because this one also was fairly early on ran into a case where they had a big scope and idea and whatever else for the story, and then it just, well, it didn't quite have everything ready or whatever else. It did its full release, but then they kept adding and adding and adding and adding new stories and features and whatever else. And if we can find a video from like back in the day over, I want to say earlier I saw, yeah, this guy right here. Hopefully it's muted. There we go. Like back in the day, this one was just absolutely slow in terms of how it played or whatever else. But again, there was this feeling, this kind of feeling of earnestness to it, that they were still kind of keeping at it, still adding things, still, trying to adjust things, trying to make this idea work for all involved. And over time, it ended up turning into something a lot better. So as far as, hell, actually, I should probably bring up Monster Sanctuary here too, in terms of, well, hell, I have way more hours on the Switch at this point, but in terms of, again, games where there's an indie project with an indie budget, which, funnily enough, actually just, okay, I'll explain this later, but another case where a game took these classic ideas where they're like, what if Metroid but Pokemon? Where, again, they revived these old ideas, they made them fun, they added some new spiffy stuff, and they gave it their all, in terms of just repeatedly throwing features at it, repeatedly making it feel nicer and nicer, and it feels really, really solid to play. I don't know what earlier versions looked like, but again, whether or not it had any... I can't believe I haven't written a review for this yet. Whether or not there were any controversies, honestly, I would never know, because frankly, the overall positivity around this game is frankly immense. And frankly, just playing it, you immediately get a nice, happy feeling. But either way, I'm getting a little carried away here on sidetracks and whatnot. My point is, as far as the mistakes that they made for... or hell, like, to compare with other indie projects, I haven't even made a video on this particular one yet. I am planning to go and kind of re-review this one, but like, in many cases, it's very hard to judge a lot of these indies in terms of their overall worths, because like, let's say, something like Crimson there, like it's coming out at 30 for those 40 something hours, right? Or something like Monster Sanctuary you can regularly get for like $5-10 on sale, but again, it's got a ton of stuff going for it there. Or something like a Tactics Ogre, which potentially could see you entertained for thousands of hours, you can regularly get for like $30, or cheaper depending on the time of year or whatnot. So it's very hard to judge the actual overall value, and it's really just kind of oftentimes coming down to whether or not you want to support the thing in question. Like, I know personally, when it came to something like Sword of the Stars, The Pit, it's not necessarily an SRPG, but it's close enough to count, where, let's say, originally The Pit, like Sots the Pit, the original, had so much heart to it, had so much goodwill, that the community regularly would just rally around it in terms of just like, here's these cool things. This thing is desperately unfair, but it is super fun to try to deal with the unfairness. That's the entire point. You're here to suffer. It's a strategy game where you're meant to die pretty much every turn, and it feels really good to overcome those challenges. Like, again, enough so that this is kind of one of my little very minor badges of pride here of like 0.3% of players have ever managed to beat the hardest difficulty with the worst character in this game. But either way, as far as this game is concerned, the first one had that goodwill, that good feel, everything else. They had two others. Let's see if we can find these other ones here. Where they had Pit Infinity, and then they had Pit 2. And both of them have gone down dramatically darker routes, not necessarily because the, artistic intent wasn't there, but because it didn't feel like it had the same heart, and definitely not the same optimization of the original. where it's very, like, you look at something like the original Pit here, and it's very easy to say, like, oh shoot, this thing, like, with all of its DLC goes on sale for like $10. This is freaking amazing. You know, this is such amazing value, and clearly there's so much love in here because it's a fully completed product. And then you go and immediately compare it with something like Pit 2, where it's still technically in early access, and if they technically pull it out of early access, I mean, hell, even my review on this one definitely needs more time in the oven, where it literally just feels like here is a version of this one that's supposed to look nicer, but still, due to early access, kind of looks like shit, if we're honest. That's a lot harder to play, whereas you can just go back to the original and get like 40 times the features for way less cost in most situations. Or something like Pit Infinity, where it's so poorly optimized that despite the intent and cool ideas behind it, as far as I'm concerned, it was basically a DOA project, because, like, even on no computer that I've had has this ever run well, which makes it near unplayable or what have you. But again, I still bought it because I still love the hell out of trying to support the devs in this case, because these guys do give it their all, even if they fuck up a pretty decent amount of times. But every game will have its controversies. Every game will have its mistakes every now and then. Like, hell, at this point, it's like, how many folks love the absolute hell out of Reborn? I love the hell out of this game. While it's only 560 hours on the Steam version, I easily have thousands of it across different versions at this point. And this is a game that, again, if you look over at the Steam page, will still to this day have mixed reviews, because a large majority of folks that originally went and reviewed the dang thing, it actually did go back to mostly positive. Hell yeah, job done. All right, thank you. Finally, I guess they finally got rid of the bad reviews. Yes, I knew it would finally turn around. Okay, for those that don't know, for a while there, we had mostly mixed to just mixed for the reviews. Because a lot of folks were just plain making stuff up, like about the original or what have you, or posting reviews trying to say stuff like, oh, nothing changed since the PSP version, it's just a port. It's like, you have no idea how many things they changed. You have not even played the fucking thing, have you? Anyway, so, point being, there's always a chance for a comeback no matter what. Granted, this is way bigger of a name, but still. Let's go back to Crimson here. So in terms of the overall value, as far as I'm concerned, if it does live up to that like 40 hours thing, regardless of the fuck up with this post here, because this is literally just a post, it's something that I've seen people panic and delete things that you'll see a lot of folks in the kind of startup type of situation that will panic over the slightest thing, because they think if they don't delete something that they are going to get completely destroyed by something, or they'll think that, they'll have a run on their finances or what have you. Like, it's a position that's very easy to be critical of when you're staring from the outside, but when you're in that bubble, stuff looks very, very different and way more terrifying. So if somebody sees that situation, they're like, okay, well, we can't live up to this goal anymore. Keeping it up would be false advertising. I guess we delete the original thing. There's that logic that would have to potentially be taken into consideration. On the flip side, you could easily also judge it as, well, suddenly they're not meeting the goal anymore, so we can't have those original things up anymore, bad intentions, that kind of thing. Personally, the way that I see it, this just, from what I've seen, while there are a lot of things that certainly feel like this came out of the oven too early still, like a lot of, like the health bars on field still feel like they're a bit placeholder, the tiles feel like they need more indication of what you're actually selecting at any given time. There needs to be feedback, for example, on the debuffs and what exactly they do on the field itself. A lot of times it kind of gives me almost that like Witcher 2 feeling, where there's so much stuff that's technically taking place, but good luck explaining any of it on the fly. Like, there needs to be more tooltips, in my opinion. So either way, there's a lot of like little things that need to be patched up. I do think that it was released too early, but as far as the cutting down on the scope, it almost feels like it was inevitable to a degree, and the ideal situation would have been that it was announced earlier. It does sound like the way that it looks from the outside in is basically like, oh shoot, we're not going to make it. Last support check bounced or something, so oh shoot, time to release before rent's due or something. That's what it ends up looking like from the outside looking in. So I'm hoping that they directly address it to some degree. I mean, obviously it's a hard thing to address any particular ways. So as far as all that's concerned, like, that's the way that I see it. If it is that 40-something hours, if they do continue on adding new features, and especially if they update the UI stuff to allow that whole cross-classing thing to be a bit more intuitive, then that would be easily, kind of just an understandable price situation there, and it would be all well and good price-wise. For those that didn't know, the full thing was supposed to have been going up to 40 once release had happened. So either way, basically they didn't do the price increase, but they also couldn't complete the full scope of the project. It sucks, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, it isn't the end of the world. I've seen far more egregious stuff. Hell, if you want to see a project not meeting its scope, how many of Xenonauts 2, don't get me wrong, is freaking amazing. Now, years ago though, I don't know if you guys remember, but the joke of when is Xenonauts 2 coming out, is it out yet, has been a thing for years. It was supposed to be almost done and getting ready for everything 4 or 5 years ago, and then only a few months ago did it finally end up going somewhere, because they kept changing directions with it over and over, and clearly, those that played Xeno 1 knew that the devs had good intentions and everything, but it was regularly this thing of so is this thing ever coming out, or are we just living off crowdfunding money? What's going on here, But anyways, either way, obviously they would have already closed the crowdfunding, but long before release or what have you, and clearly Xeno 2 is one hell of a fun game to play, but just so you know, indie projects are just weird like that. Just stuff happens that honestly would make no sense in any other business, if we're completely honest. Now let's go ahead and look over some other examples, see if I'm trying to think what else is coming to mind here. As far as other indies, here, let's just do something like that. I mean, hell, look at something like Chimera Squad there. A lot of folks were mad about this one. It's not an indie, but it's almost an indie. It's this weird case where Firaxis basically gave one of their rando teams a weekend to go slap a game together. They're like, okay, look guys, we got this idea for this little mini squad police type situation. Can we do the XCOM thing with it? And they're like, yeah, whatever, here you go. Here's no budget and some assets, and go for it. Let's see what happens. And the result was, despite being, again, a $30 game and technically only 20-30 hours, a really fun experience. Length and overall intended original scope and all of that thing is a very weird thing to judge stuff by. It's really hard to judge indies in terms of their value, because there's really no universal price for everything, and in a lot of cases, if somebody is charging through the ears for all kinds of little things, obviously that's a scam. But as far as what Crimson did here, this just seems like a pretty standard newbie fuck up that happened. Again, comes off as sketchy from the outside looking in, but honestly, haven't seen people go through that kind of stuff. I've seen folks do way dumber and cause way more problems through similar gut reactions. I mean, on a bit of a comparison note here, let's say we take a look at something like Asperia here. This is one that I really don't necessarily want to put down, despite having an overwhelmingly negative experience with it. Because, and funnily enough, it says 3.5. This originally was 8 or something. I don't know why this stuff always changes. But with this one, they were trying to do a GBA Fire Emblem kind of thing, but similarly to what I was criticizing with Crimson before, this kind of stuff needs buttons. It's not a mouse and keyboard type of situation as far as I'm concerned, because the genre in general, even XCOM is on controllers at this point. In Asperia's case, it was a case where they had a story they wanted to tell. They wanted to do this whole Fire Emblem thing. They clearly were fans of the genre and that series in general, because a lot of elements from a lot of different games of that series were there, but also implemented in a almost ROM hack kind of fashion. So the first few chapters for the introduction, you're not allowed to lose anybody, but you're given a bunch of crit specialists, and it's this is a class that's meant to be high risk, high reward, and you have them surrounded by 6 enemies here, and then you're just kind of attempting to kite stuff while re-rolling for RNG. It's it feels kind of crappy in terms of starting off there. But again, it's understandable from that perspective. I mean, in that particular case, as far as I'm aware, they didn't add controller support as of yet. I was giving this a few more months in the oven to try and go back and kind of redo stuff here. Wait, fixes to mouse control? Did they... I don't know if they added more stuff. I mean, it says mouse use on full screen. I'm assuming maybe they did add controller support. If they did, that'd be pretty handy. I know at the time that it just wasn't there. But it was pretty difficult to play. You could play it on a Steam Deck. It was decent enough with the default controls because you literally just needed a mouse for the most part. It just was kind of unintuitive, but really it was like the overall balance of like a story that quite frankly I didn't particularly care for. But it seemed like something that didn't really belong as a full release that was, you know, getting pushed out as a full release. Again, I don't want to criticize it yet because I don't know the latest version of this, but just to give you an idea, when I'm seeing a case where something had an official kind of like full release and whatever else here, like when was its actual launch date here? Yeah, like full release was back in March. Really? It's been that long? Yeesh, I really should get along with that review. I promised it months ago. Anyways, like in that particular case, I played it and just couldn't stand playing it for more than like 30 minutes at a time, because every time I would go into it, it's like, you know, balance was off, the playability in general was feeling pretty janky, it was constantly stuttering, didn't really particularly care for the music too much, it kept constantly switching back and forth. A lot of the character designs just... it seemed like the kind of sketchy stuff my friend in middle school would always hide when you walked into the room, you know. So like it was that kind of situation, which again, to some that's exactly what they're looking for, but that's just kind of how that stuff looks, you know. Let's see. Actually recently, like I was going and reviewing this Wandering Sword thing forever ago, which again, I think it's technically classed as an indie project. This was the demo version. Actually just got the full version to go and release, but again, similar situation where it felt like there was a lot of good intentions here, but it was hard to judge what the overall value was. What actually was the price of this thing? Like if it was like $20-$30, that was freaking great, but I don't actually know. Let's take a quick peek. I know this has gone completely beyond what we were originally talking about. But whatever. Okay, so it doesn't actually even seem to mention a price in this case, but still, I would assume somewhere like $20-$30. I think that's what it was originally mentioning, you know, price-wise or whatnot. So as far as like a $30 price tag for a for an indie kind of thing, it's not unusual by any means. If it reaches that, you know, 40, 50, whatever mark, it's fine. I mean, again, the only part that really sucks is the way that the news was handled, which... like, again, it sucks now, but in the long term, as long as they stick to it, the game itself is pretty fun so far. Needs more polish. Maybe would have, like, personally, if it was up to me, obviously, like, I've got no financial stake in the matter, so it's very easy to have no stake in something and be like, oh, here's what I would have done, you know. But, you know, it does feel like it maybe could have had more time in the oven there. Let's see. I mean, I'm not really sure what else there is to say. Like, again, going back to the value prospect thing, like right now, if I'm not mistaken, I think TOR is on sale. Is it on the sale? No, but it's like its official standard price is like 50, but it ended up it drops down to 25 to 30 every time there's a sale. So like, yeah, to me personally, if it was a choice between these two, I think you know where I'm leaning on that one, but if we're just talking about, like, you're looking for something else to scratch the itch, you're looking to see what the indie scene is cooking up these days, honestly, regardless of the mistakes, I think Crimson is still trying interesting things, so to me, you know, it's still fine there. Like, granted, I really hope it does end up taking a similar turn to how Symphony of War did it, where, you know, at first it wasn't clear whether they would stick the landing, but then they really stuck the landing and, you know, really just kind of kept improving stuff from there. Or again, you know, took the sticking to it in the long-term approach of something like Himeko Story there. Time will tell how this ends up playing out. I hope that they talk to other devs, just kind of in the genre in general. I hope that they are talking to other devs in terms of, how to maybe do the PR thing better, because that was a pretty unfortunate misstep. So it's gonna hurt them for sure, the way that it was handled. There's enough instant negative press that had happened regarding the controversy there that it's definitely going to hurt their numbers, even just looking at it from a pragmatic sense here. So hopefully they correct that. Hopefully they turn it around. Hopefully they get goodwill back. Hopefully they end up polishing out the kind of messed up pieces there. Actually, let's go ahead and launch it real quick just to explain some of those things I was kind of griping about earlier, because I won't have another window to actually record anything for a few days here. So let's go ahead and take a quick little peek-a-majig at this. Did it actually go full screen on the recording? Let's go ahead and take this off there so that it does. Oh, hi there, Dagar. How's it going? Forgot to turn off notifications. All right. Okay, as far as performance goes, generally speaking, it's been fine. I have noticed issues with it, like, for example, you'll occasionally see two soundtracks layering on top of another. That needs some fixing. Again, if we're talking about stuff that would be ideal to fix before launch, initial launch for this thing, it could definitely use some optimization, because it takes a surprisingly long time. It is a little bit weird to see this take as long, if not longer, to launch than Armored Core 6. Like, I mean, it's not like this thing can't handle this whole game, so, it does take quite a surprisingly long time. The UI definitely needs some... we're just going to go full critical on this here for just a little bit. In terms of the controls, like, Steam Deck controls are going to switch between mouse controls, but it's, all different versions of mouse controls. So, right now, we're technically on controller. I'm using left thumbstick as the mouse. In some cases, it's R2 that's going to be the select thing, and here it's X. In other menus, the right trackpad will be the mouse. In other cases, it'll be the right joystick that's the mouse. And, that lack of consistency is not ideal. Sure, obviously, I'm sure somebody tested it in terms of figuring all this stuff out. But, right here, intuitively, what I would think is not move mouse over to select party. It would be let's say Y select party, X selects inventory or something, or, just everything else is in a drop-down menu. But some kind of quick access to the party menu would be ideal here, because that's probably what I want to go over to. If there's random maps, like, for example, there's a random fight that pops up on this map, I think it's random. It might also be scripted. I don't actually know. But, for example, they'll pay attention to stuff like noting what amenities are on the map, but at the same time, if I leave, that fight will still respawn here. But if I use the autosave, I have respawned on top of the map and just can skip it. If we go over here, let's say I have this stabby wizard over here, there's zero indication whatsoever, as far as I can tell, over his being multiclassed in any way. We can go over to the different menus, but it would be nice if all of this information was maybe laid out all at once. It's good to know his, his wait time and everything else, but also it might be useful to know that he's also the wizard guy that does the buffs and things like that. Now, this might just be a low-level issue. This might be I started off this save file before a bunch of updates issue. It could be a lot of different things, but this guy is functionally worthless as far as pretty much anything goes. He can't do damage physically. He can't do damage with casts. He can do buffs, and that's kind of about it. It may also be an equipment issue. Honestly, I don't know. There's a lot of kind of feedback stuff that feels like it could be doing a bit more in terms of giving me that information, So I give him this thing. It improved it, I guess, but I don't necessarily know his full kind of combined stats here. Is it over here, maybe? Yeah, it does seem to be, but again, you're not seeing that stuff necessarily when you're going and putting that equipment on. As far as slots go, in general, it feels a little bit weird that they're unlocking stuff like this, but then you also have to spend the points for it, because they're still unlocking them at certain levels, and or require knowing another skill first. But it doesn't feel like you'd be able to get to these later parts without doing these at some point, so unless you just skipped them, it seems a little bit like busy work, but I don't really know. But again, all of these are different, it seems like you can learn these off of different spells that you already have. Like right here, 2 and 3 are supposedly learnable at later levels, I assume, but he can't learn them yet. But these just seem to be upgrades of stuff that he already has, I think. I don't know. Maybe this is just stuff that he could potentially cross-class. I don't know. A lot of this stuff, like, comes off as fairly unintuitive. Like, honestly, a lot of this stuff, even having, frankly, played an obsessive amount of this genre, a lot of it is a little bit hard to understand at this point. It really would be nice, for example, to be able to go over to something like this, and, like, strengthened is pretty obvious. But for example, quickened, does that make their recovery time better? Does that make their movement faster? Does it make them jump higher? Don't exactly necessarily know. This is especially true for something like the healers there. I think this was the one that had the healing thing here. Or something like focused. What does that mean? I have no freaking idea. Is that increased crits? Is that better casting or something? I don't know. I just completely don't have that information. Like like the archers and stuff like that, yeah, that makes total sense. Headshot, foot shot, perfectly fine. Again, whether it's to do with this particular save file or not, I know this particular save file is functionally soft locked at the moment, just due to not having those flank abilities on my people here. It feels like every map that they go into, they simply get run over, just pretty much immediately. This particular menu, it feels okay. There we go. So you can use the back triggers. For some reason, it wasn't doing it at first to skip between everybody, but it would be nice to have some indicator here to know that somebody's cross-classed. You can give everybody mounts, and that system is one of the like cool systems about this game, but we don't have mounts yet. That's another thing. We're a few hours into the game at this point. We've seen that mounts exist as a mechanic. As of so far, I don't think there's any way to actually get them. Like the stable seems unavailable. I'm assuming you'll run into a stable at some point. This kind of feels like something that we would have encountered already, because it does feel like one of those things that, you know, you'd want to get in on right away, especially considering it's right there, you know, on your menu. But again, it just feels like intuitiveness is a bit lacking in general. So like this right here, this wasn't, I don't believe at least that this was around before. I don't know for sure. But either way, had I known about it, I'm pretty sure I would have picked it up on everybody. Anyway, that particular information is a bit hard to necessarily slide into place here as far as being useful, I guess. I know I'm starting to ramble even more so than usual, but quite frankly, just kind of tired at this point and trying to get any last thoughts out here while we're in the tail end of the video that nobody's ever going to watch. And yeah, so that's kind of about that. I want to do more of what's going on here. I do plan to just start it again from start to finish. You can skip the intro at this point. And just kind of re-review this thing from start to end to determine kind of overall whether any part of the freak out is warranted or whether it does feel like it's cut short. If it has a satisfying ending, if it does reach the amount of time that they were saying that it would, then I feel that this is just fine. Again, development controversies don't really interest me as long as it doesn't affect the game itself. I mean, in this case, it did obviously end up making it a bit shorter, but I remember thinking quietly in the back of my head that 5 different factions feels unrealistic from the get-go, but hell, I think I even might have mentioned that in my original review, but I don't remember for sure. But to me, it just feels like more intuitive information on what any of these do. Like, they tell you the attack pattern, that part's important. I don't necessarily know what any of these stats do for sure. Like, especially as far as armor goes, outside of shields, I have no idea what any armor does whatsoever. Anyway, that's about that. I should really cut it off here, and probably should have cut it off a decent bit ago because I stopped making sense at this point. Alright, hopefully this was useful information. Y'all have yourselves a good one. I hope that this ends up resulting in something positive overall. Like, I'm hoping that they get past this controversy. I'm hoping it ends up being, you know, something similar to Fellseal along those roads there. And okay, that I was going to go down a whole tangent on Fellseal and a few of those other indies, but really what it comes down to is that when you're going and playing through a game and you can just feel the love on display in every single little facet of the design, that's what makes them kind of last in the long term. Like those moments when you're going through something like Symphony there, and you're seeing like seeing those moments of just all of your like every time you cross another corner, it's like, oh, you know, they loved their AoE too. As soon as you see the upgrade tree, and you're seeing how the ideas from an upgrade tree like that are being applied to a Fire Emblem situation, but the fights are being handled in an ogre battle situation. And suddenly it's like, oh man, I missed that there were no such thing as like sneak attacks or flank attacks or whatever else in ogre battle. And suddenly they're like, oh, you know, hang on, you know, hold my spear, as all of the skirmishers disappear and attack from behind. Like, there's just those feelings of, you know, love in every little detail there. Or like Felseal, where there was clearly a love of FFT there, where it's like, oh, you know, it sure sucks how all these AI characters always have the same stuff every playthrough. And I know I wasn't the only one that got really like massive FFTA vibes from this game, and always had that moment growing up where I expected the FFTA random teams to change, and then they never did. But when going and playing through this one, every single time, I've always had all the randomization options on. So they'll come in and it's like, you know, this guy that would have just been a random knight on any other playthrough is suddenly coming in and, like, let's say he shows up with an MP shield and also happens to be some kind of like gun specialist and also can just snipe from, you know, the other end of the map or whatnot, or just gets free attacks on anybody nearby or what have you. Just seeing them randomize in these interesting combinations and then inspiring you to try your own weird combinations just off this random immersive, just emergent gameplay, you know? And that's what I was hoping to see some of from the multi-classing system in Crimson. It needs more intuitive stuff to it, and it needs the AI to do more stuff with it. At least, again, from what I've seen so far. There may be more down the line. I don't know yet, and I really was hoping to put in a few more hours yesterday, but it just kept updating and updating and updating, and finally was just like, fuck it, Monster Sanctuary time. So just ended up playing that until I passed out. But anyways, yeah, this has gone on a ramble and a half. Y'all have yourselves a good one. This has gone way too long. I apologize. And, yeah, I will see you in the next one of these. Have a good one. Oh, and just, yeah, let me know what you think of this whole Crimson situation. I just think it's weird to judge. But, alright, moving on.